Welcome to this episode of Chattin with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Randy Couture. What's up, Randy?
Hey, Bill, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show. Really appreciate it.
You bet, man. Glad it worked out.
Yeah, me too. So you have an amazing career. You've fought some pretty severe battles in your career. Brock Lesnar, all these incredible athletes. And before we get started, you want to tell the people who you are and where you're from?
Randy Couture grew up in Seattle, Washington, actually about 45 miles north of Seattle, a smaller town called Linwood. I started wrestling at the age of 10 in junior high school up there, junior high and high school. Ended up in the Army at 19 years old, ended up wrestling for the Army, was an alternate on the 88 Olympic team as a soldier, wrestling for the Army, and actually won my first world championship wrestling for the Army in the Armed Forces Wrestling Championship. It's called SISM, the Military World Championships in 1988. That summer in Palermo, Sicily. It was a pretty amazing wrestling journey. And that basically was the start of my combative sports training and a life spent on a wrestling mat, basically. Wasn't until 97 when I started fighting and got introduced to the sport of mixed martial arts, or no holds barred, as they called it back then.
Yeah.
Kind of did that on a whim. Was coaching at Oregon State, coaching wrestling and saw this sport. And back then it was a little different. You filled out an application and sent it in. There was no amateur ranks. There was no proving grounds or place to get your feet wet. You just jumped right in. And my very first fight was UFC 13. I fought twice that night in a heavyweight tournament. And the ball was rolling, off and running. So.
And back then there was how many rounds was it?
It wasn't rounds. It was a 21-minute fight. It was 15 minutes. And then if nobody won at the end of the 15 minutes, you went 2 3-minute overtimes to hopefully determine a winner. And then it was about a year later that we started running towards regulation. They started implementing rounds and coming up with unified rules, and all the things that we see in the sport now are all because of that, running towards regulation, trying to be understood as athletes and as a sport. Because for a long time there, most people thought we were crazy, that we were criminals because of what we do, because we get in the cage and fight. But obviously that's not the case.
It was brutal in the beginning. I remember when it first started. It was brutal.
Yeah, it was tough. It was a tough way to make a living any way you cut it. But back then there were only 3 or 4 rules on the books, really. You couldn't groin strike, you couldn't eye gouge, you couldn't strike in the throat, and you couldn't fish hook. And some people don't know what a fish hook is. If somebody has a cut or you stick your finger in somebody's mouth, that's considered fish hooking. And that was outlawed back then. But that were really the only 4 books, four rules on the books at that time.
Wow. And so around that time, were there people getting really hurt?
No.
Have you seen people get hurt? I know you've hurt people in the ring.
Really hurt? I mean, maybe you have to define that, but sure, you're going to see people get cut. And I've seen very, very few serious injuries. Occasionally you'll see a joint or a broken limb. It's a contact sport for sure, but most all of those things heal within a matter of weeks. So I've never seen anybody seriously injured in this sport. I competed in it for 14 years and I've been involved in it now since 1997. So 26 years. Yeah, knockouts are a serious thing and something we have to take seriously. And the athletic commissions are there to protect these fighters, sometimes from themselves, because we're a bit crazy. Let's be honest. It's a crazy way to make a living, but I love it. It's a great sport. It's an amazing sport. There's no better character builder on the planet than the individual combative sports, in my opinion.
So you're a 6-time UFC champion. You have completed record of 16 title fights. And what was it like to be fighting as a heavyweight?
The bigger guys are just that. They're big, and you have to approach them a little bit differently. You don't try to go nose to nose or toe to toe with guys that size. You have to make them move, make them work. you know, I had to use my agility and my brain. It's a thinking man's game, kinetic chess, I like to call it. And so you have to make the bigger guys work harder and take them out of their comfort zone. Use the speed, agility, and athleticism that you have against a bigger guy to your advantage as much as possible.
Try to get them winded out, right?
It tends to be harder for big guys to find partners that are going to push them and allow them to get in the kind of shape that smaller guys who have more partners and more training environment are able to do. It's always a challenge. It was a challenge for me to find big heavyweights to come in and train to prepare for a guy like Brock Lesnar or a guy like Tim Sylvia. You know, those are great big guys. You know, 6'5", 290 pounds. Tim Sylvia, 6'8". You know, finding guys that are that big to replicate that style of fighting and that size of athlete is what you have to do to prepare to deal with that weight and deal with that size.
Yeah, I mean, so what's it like going into one of them fights with one of these huge guys? Like, do you go in with a strategy? Are you? I
was a guy that always tried to have a strategy. To try to figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are, where they seem to like to be and not like to be. Where did they win? Where did they lose? And then, you know, have a team behind you that's going to honestly evaluate your skill set and how that skill set matches up with that opponent. Fighting is problem solving. That guy poses certain problems physically, mentally, technically, tactically, that you have to figure out how to solve. And when you get it right, it's amazing. And when you get it wrong, it's a rough night.
So, I mean, your record's pretty good, but you've had some losses.
You know, I have a 19-11 fight record. You know, everybody talks about 6 world championships, so that means I lost it at least 5 times. And the truth is, I lost it all 6. In my mind, winning and championship spirit is not about winning all the time. It's about how you deal with the adversity of losing, picking yourself back up, evaluating where your mistakes were, figuring out how to go back out there and be better, do better, be a better athlete. And at the end of the day, I think a better human.
I think a lot of people, they just focus on the wins. Like you said, you have to overcome that. Like I battle with drug addiction, you know, and my getting through problems in life is it's one of the hardest things to get through problems and not go running to alcohol or drugs. And that's a win for me, you know?
Yeah. Self-medicating could be a huge issue. Obviously, I work a lot in the veteran community, and those guys many are struggling with post-traumatic stress, TBIs, as well as some real physical wounds and injuries. And that could be a difficult thing to deal with. Plus, there's an adrenaline seeking nature, and, you know, walking out on a combat zone and being shot at and having to defend yourself in that way. And so a lot of these guys are adrenaline seeking. They self-medicate to kind of numb themselves as they try to transition back to civilian life and be contributing members of our society. And there's a lot of pitfalls involved with that transition. So I know a little bit about what you're talking about. I see it with a lot of our vets on a regular basis.
Yeah. So did they ever call you to go to military service and be deployed or anything like that?
When I was in the Army from 1982 to 1988, there wasn't a whole lot going on back then. Honestly, there was no real military actions going on. You know, I think Grenada happened. There was the Emil DeMarcos debacle down there, and kind of overthrowing that regime. But I never got deployed anywhere. You know, I got out in 88 at the peak of the Cold War. Basically, I was a Cold War veteran.
Yeah.
So I never saw a battlefield, unlike many of these men and women now since 9/11 who have, in the battle on terror in the last 20 years, have had actually go to a battlefield and do the things that I trained to do and never had to do.
But so now after you step away from the fighting, do you help train like law enforcement and things like that with some of the skills that you have?
I've been doing that for a very, very long time. Working with a lot of our special operations soldiers, some of our Secret Service men, the law enforcement officers at FLETC and various combative schools around the U.S. Army and the U.S. Marine Corps. And then, since becoming a public person and a fighter, I've gotten to do way more cool stuff with the military, certainly, than I ever did when I wore the uniform. But it's a way for me to get back, a way for me to use the skills and rub elbows with those guys that I admire, that I appreciate, that took the same oath that I took. Become a deputy under Sheriff Mike Neal in Monroe County, Arkansas.
I remember that. I remember.
Been doing some speaking with him and some active shooter conferences and things like that, just learning more about that and putting those years of wrestling and fighting skills to use in another capacity, in another forum.
So when you were in the military, were there any crazy incidents happen that you remember?
I mean, most of the crazy stuff that happened to me in the military happened with regard to being on the All Army Wrestling Team, which is a group of crazy guys, trying to carve out their niche on wrestling mats representing the Army. And some of those guys are my best friends to this day. Sweat and bled with those guys, trying to make the Army team, trying to beat the other services, trying to make the national team, make the Olympic team. All those things were the goals that we had set before us and set about, pushing each other, making each other better, and hoping that each and every one of us got an opportunity to achieve those dreams, to achieve those goals.
So now when you win a title, what's that feeling like when you're raising your hands up and you got the belt on? What's going through your head?
Well, it's obviously a sense of accomplishment. You set a goal, you set out to solve some problems in both the physical and tactical nature. And when it goes well, it's a great night. You feel elated. That elation can last for a couple of weeks and doesn't just go away overnight. And the accomplishment of those goals, that gives you confidence that you have a model and a way to replicate that, to go do that again.
Yeah. So now what's it like when you lose? How is it like stepping away from the ring once you lose?
That's actually, it gets dark. You hate to have setbacks, but you have to embrace that. You have to recognize that is your opportunity to really dig in, to change course, to figure out what you did wrong, analyze it with your team, with the guys that helped you get there, be honest about it, and then set about fixing those things you made mistakes in. Mistakes happen, even the times you won. I never watched the fights I won. Why? I got the outcome I wanted, but you can bet your butt I watched the ones I lost, because that's where I was going to get better. That's where I was going to be a better athlete. And like I said before, a better human at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, these guys, their skill set is pretty, it's at a high level,
Oh, no doubt about it.
Yeah. These are modern day gladiators. I look at them like they're modern day gladiators, basically.
A lot of great fighters out there. The science of athletics has gone a long way. I fought till I was 47. I think you're seeing that trend across the board in athletics, in a lot of sports. Guys fighting well into their 40s now, where that cutoff used to be around 30. Most people thought you were over the hill at 30 if you were especially getting into a combative sport like boxing or wrestling or fighting. I started at 33, almost 34, and they already thought I was an old man and over the hill. That in some ways gave me an advantage. I feel like I was underestimated a lot, overlooked by many, and being the underdog seemed to suit me very, very well. It takes the pressure off. You can just go out and do exactly what you trained to do and not worry about it, any of the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look at the BKFC world champion right now. She's 41 years old, and she just got into the sport.
Yeah.
So that shows you right there. It's never too late.
No, never too late.
Definitely. So have you ever had any situations where people would test you outside of the ring because of who you are?
No. You get the offhanded comment here or there. Oh, I thought you'd be bigger, or things like that. Most of the time there's alcohol involved. I'm smiling. I got nothing to prove to anybody. I'm a generally gregarious and outgoing person. So you're going to have to really push me to challenge me like that. And that's never happened. Nobody, they see the cauliflower ears, and
usually that's a sign, right? Stay the fuck away from me, man. So, since you retired, what was it like retiring? And
well, I think it's always a challenge.
After?
I've been in that transition a couple of times. I walked away from the military, after 6 years. Thankfully, I had a built-in new purpose. I was left the Army to start my college career and wrestle in college and get my degree. So there was no downtime. I didn't have to flounder or wonder what I was going to do next or who I was when I walked away from that uniform. And that's a struggle for a lot of guys. And same thing when you walk away from athletics after 14 years of being a professional athlete, it becomes a big part of who you are, of your identity. So, making that rational choice, making this, the decision to walk away when I did on my own terms. I had acting and the business stuff, the clothing company, the gym, and all that other stuff was up and functioning. So my purpose and goal was already built in. I knew where I was headed. I didn't struggle. I was very fortunate in that regard. That transition for a lot of athletes is a real struggle. They lose that piece of who they are, and what their purpose is now. And so finding a way to get back, finding a way to get involved in something new that's positive, that isn't self-medicating, that isn't adrenaline seeking, can be a huge thing for a lot of these guys. And that our veterans go through the same issue. That transition, walking away from that uniform, can be a real challenge. As many of them are so excited to get out of that uniform and get out of the service, and they don't forward think about, okay, well, what are you going to do now? Where are you headed? Who are you now? However long you served, that became your identity and your purpose. So that is a real struggle for a lot of our guys.
Yeah, I think getting a plan in place and getting the right steps for what you're going to do moving forward is a big thing to help people,
Yeah, the military does very little. They give you a week of training when you process out. And then obviously we have all heard the horror stories with the VA and getting any kind of services through the VA and the waiting lists and all that stuff is just a nightmare. So we got a lot of work to do there. We got a lot of things to clean up. I don't want to open a political can of worms, but we have a lot of issues for sure.
So I want to ask you about the referees and the judges.
Yep.
What do you think that their skill set should be? Because I've heard some people tell me they don't even know some of the moves that they're doing on the other opponents. They don't even know what's going on. He's like, I don't even know. Some of the judges have no clue of what they're watching. So
there's been a learning curve for sure with the judging, the referees. John McCarthy's been great. There's a lot of places out there, and John runs a school to try and educate a lot of guys about what they're looking at and how to deal with the pressure of making those decisions in the heat of the moment. And I think he's produced and been involved with raising the level of referee that we've had in our sport. And that learning curve has gone way up because of his school and a lot of the things that he does. And I see a lot of those referees come into the gym because they want to observe training. They want to see the situations, the mindset, and all the things that we're doing in the training environment. That only helps them when they walk out in that cage on fight night to be a better referee. We're seeing more fighters getting, Frank Trigg is judging and refereeing now. Chris Lieben is judging now. And I think that's great. We need more fighters to step up and be willing to assume those roles because they do know what they're looking at. And there has been a huge learning curve with the judges. And I think the judges are the area right now where we need a lot of work. And there needs to be some accountability. Why are people so disenchanted with boxing? Because we get so many of these disparaging decisions. I watched one fight and the judges score that fight a completely different way than how I saw it go down. And we're seeing some of that in MMA now too. And there's no accountability. There's always going to be the human factor. Humans are making those decisions, but there still has to be some transparency and accountability for those judges that are making those calls and putting those scores down on those scorecards. Why don't they show those scores each round so the fighters know exactly where they stand? The crowd knows exactly what's going on and how the judges at least are seeing those. And then that judge has to be accountable for that score he put on that card. At the end of the night, I don't see any accountability or transparency there. They don't have to stand up and account for themselves. Well, where did you come up with this 96 in this fight? Everybody else saw it this way, or the other two judges saw it a different way. Please account for yourself. And I think those, especially when there's world championship fights on the line, those need to be the exceptional judges and the exceptional referees that are controlling a person's career in their hands and those decisions they make in the heat of that moment. And I think when you get it wrong, there has to be some accountability. They have to be demoted. They shouldn't be able to go right back into the next card and judge somebody else's championship fight when they've just messed up a call on this card.
Yeah.
And I think that's there has to be. I know we have that in wrestling. There's a ranking system for referees and judges in wrestling and international competition, and only the top ranked guys get to do the Olympics or the World Championship finals because there's so much at stake. And I think a very similar system would be easy to implement in fighting, in both boxing and MMA, because we have some work that needs to be done there.
Yeah, because sometimes I was talking to Stitch, Jacob Stitch Duran, and he was saying, you know, they see a guy on top, they don't care. They're going to score it like he's winning. The guy on the bottom could be beating the shit out of the dude, and the guy on top's going to win.
Recognizing what you're looking at, who's dictating the fight, the pace of the fight, the technique and the tactics of the fight, who's responding or forcing the other athlete to respond is a huge thing, and who's winning a fight. And that can be disguised when somebody gets taken down. You can be in a bottom position and still be dictating the pace, tactics, and technique that are occurring in that fight. Defense is its own reward. It doesn't account on the scorecards because you have to defend tactics and technique or the fight's over, right? So I think a lot of judges and some of the referees don't understand some of those situations. In my opinion, the refereeing pool has gotten way, way better over the course of the last 10 years, the last decade. The judges, I think, there's still some work and some transparency and accountability that needs to be built into that part of the sport in both boxing and MMA.
Yeah. So they don't have to show the card on how they judge?
They don't, no.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of times it's not made public, especially if it's controversial at all. Sometimes they will show it after the fact, but I think that score should be put up there each round so a fighter knows where he's at, you know, through the course of a fight.
Yeah, he'll know what he can work
turn it up
on,
or, you know, do whatever he needs to do to get himself back in a fight or, you know, whatever the case may be. So.
Now, what about the pay for the fighters? How has the pay since you started versus now, what you know, how has the pay for the fighters changed?
Well, certainly the fighter pay has incrementally increased over the years, in the years, you know, the 20 plus years that I've been doing it. But that's another area where I think we have a lot to do, a lot to get done. Again, there's lack of transparency. Promoters in the sport of mixed martial arts don't have to disclose how much money they're making off any one of these events. So how is the fighter supposed to go out and negotiate his fair value in the marketplace if nobody knows how much money was just made on the fight and the card that he was just on? They don't disclose that information. There's no transparency there. These contracts are very restrictive. You know, what's the UFC have? 650 fighters signed to their roster to a very exclusive contract. They're not allowed to go fight anywhere else. They've signed away all their ancillary rights. That's their ability to write a book, be in a video game, do a movie, any of those things that are outside with that image that they supposedly created in that cage. They now have to get Dana White's permission or the company's permission to be able to do any of those things that are ancillary to walking up in that cage and fighting. I think that's wrong. I think that's a mistake. And that's one of the reasons why I'm persona non grata with the UFC to this day, because I fought for those ancillary rights. I shined a light on those nasty contracts. And they don't like me to this day because of it. But I was doing what was best for me in my career. I wanted to hold my career in my hands and make the decisions that I thought were best for me. I didn't want to leave that up to somebody else.
So you had to fight to get out of the contract to go and be in movies and things like that?
The UFC signed, Zuffa bought the company in 2001. They were already taking people's ancillary rights, but not many fighters knew what an ancillary right was or what that was worth. I had good management at that time. And that's a whole nother topic that we could get into, but I had a very good management team at that time, battle management with Jeremy Lappin and Peter Levin. And they educated me on what an ancillary right was and why I should not sign the 17-page contract that Zuffa just put in my face to re-up and continue to be their heavyweight champion, and what those ancillary rights meant. So I held their feet to the fire. They just bought the company. I'm the heavyweight champ. They're kind of stuck with me. I don't think they thought I was very marketable because I was in my 40s in 2001, and you know, they would have loved to have gotten rid of me. Hence they wanted me to fight Pedro Hizzo in my very first fight with them at the helm. They just signed him to a 9-fight deal. Here's this nice, big, strong, young Brazilian cat that they thought was going to bring the Latin American crowd in to the pay-per-views and to their brand. And they were sure he was going to beat me. And then they'd be done with me. They didn't have to worry about my 42-year-old butt anymore being their heavyweight champion. It didn't go that way. And my entire career was kind of under that same guise, that same situation almost from the start because of my age. But at the end of the day, I did what I had to do, and I beat Pedro. They forced me into an automatic rematch with Pedro in that next fight, and I beat him again. So that was kind of the end of that story. But I found myself in that situation a lot. Fighting Chuck the first time for the interim championship, fighting Tito. Just time and time again, I think they were pretty sure I was going to get my butt whooped and get beat, and I managed to come through.
Shout out to Chuck Liddell, great guy.
Yeah, Chuck's a great guy.
So, how was it to transition into acting? What was it like to be in front of the cameras after being in the ring?
Well, I think being involved in the three of the first 4 seasons of The Ultimate Fighter actually was a big leg up for me. You're wearing a microphone, you forget you're wearing it. You're standing in front of a camera, teaching, doing the things you're already good at, and why you're in that coaching position in the first place. So you know the content, the sport inside and out. So that's an easy thing to do, and you get used to being in front of a camera and being filmed like that. So I think that actually helped me. You forget the camera's there, sometimes to your own detriment. You say and do things in front of that camera that you probably shouldn't have said or done in the reality TV genre. So I was, applied that wrestler's mindset, that military mindset to that problem as well. I was going to be first on set, diligent, know my lines, be ready to go, be prepared. Be the first with the most, basically, and I think you'll be successful and find your way looking through those eyes every single time, and that's exactly what I did with acting as well. My first acting gig was in the early 2000s in a feature film called Cradle to the Grave.
I remember.
Me, Chuck, and Tito all got the chance to play a character, a fighter in that film, in the underground fight scenes, and it was an eye opener being on a set for the first time. Seeing the process for the actors, the stuntmen, the whole thing was really intriguing, really interesting. It was like getting to go to Oz and pull back the curtain and see the guy pulling the levers, making all the smoke and fire. It was really, really intriguing and interesting. I immediately went out and started taking some acting classes. Eventually, I managed to get an agent at Gersh with Brett Nornsberg at the Gersh agency. I found an acting coach. Barry Primus has been my acting coach for over 10 years and kind of helped me ferret out how this whole thing works and this process for playing a character in a make-believe scenario and making it as truthful and as honest as you can make it, because that's basically what you're doing as an actor.
Yeah. So before that, you did Pros versus Joes. Do you remember doing this?
Yeah, that was a blast.
So you guys were fighting regular guys, right?
Yeah, they bring in a bunch of pro athletes to compete, against regular guys that maybe played college ball but never really made it to that next level, but had aspirations. We're all very good athletes, just never really made it to that pro level, to the pro ranks. So that was a very, very fun show. Met a lot, Michael Irvin, Bruce Smith. I mean, just a bunch of
Jose Canseco was on that one, right?
Jose Canseco. I mean, just a bunch of amazing athletes from other sports, and then competing against the Joes. Certainly got their attention when they threw up a real cage and made those guys walk into a real cage with me to see who was going to get submitted the least.
Did guys just tap out right away? Did guys say, "No, I'm not doing this"?
No, they put up a good fight. All of them, put up a pretty good fight.
I remember watching that.
I think the one guy had some combative experience from the Army, and he was the one that ended up winning that challenge. I think he only got submitted 4 times in the 5 minutes that we rolled. The other guys were 6 and 7 times, I think, they got submitted in that period. So But it was a blast. I had a lot of fun doing it. I hadn't had football pads on since I was in high school in 1981. So to get to put on football pads and, do a goal line stance with Bruce Smith, I mean, it was incredible. It was a really, really cool experience. Watching Jose Canseco crush baseballs out of a baseball stadium.
Yeah, that was pretty
on down
incredible.
the line. Kevin Willis, playing ball and outballing all those guys. I mean, there was just a lot of really cool stuff we got to do.
Yeah, I mean, people don't get to do that type of stuff in their lifetime,
I felt honored to be able to get to do that, and it was a fun experience.
So now you went into announcing, right? You were an announcer for a while?
Yeah, I started commentating a little bit for the UFC back when I originally retired. And then when I retired again in 2011, they brought me back on as a commentator for a couple of their shows during the year, some of their bigger pay-per-views on Fox. And then eventually I got hired by Spike TV to do some scripted and unscripted television stuff with Spike, and left my commentating job with the UFC to pursue that endeavor and that opportunity. That again threw me on the outs, with Dana White, called me a traitor and a bunch of other stuff because I signed a contract with Spike TV. Now, obviously, Spike TV was where the UFC found their home and was the only network that would put us on TV with the first few seasons of The Ultimate Fighter. So when UFC left and went to Fox, there was a huge void in programming on Spike TV, which is now Paramount, and they were looking to fill that void. So, they bought Bellator, revamped Bellator, made that their own fight show. They started Fight Master. We did Gym Rescue. We did a couple of other shows, all under that 2-year contract that I signed with Spike TV to do that stuff.
Yeah, 2013, January 2013, right?
That was a fun experience, and I learned a lot about the industry, a lot about producing, a lot about a lot of things through that. Even running a gym, being involved in 3 episodes of Gym Rescue, which is a lot of fun and an eye-opening experience as well. And then I retired from fighting, obviously, in 2011, and could just focus on acting, and then ended up getting picked up by the World Series of Fighting in their rebranding year, and in the year they became the Professional Fighters League, and they signed me as a commentator, and I'm still commentating for them as we speak. We just had our finals 2 weekends ago in Washington, D.C., and it was amazing.
That's awesome. Congratulations on all your success, man. You've had an incredible career, and a lot of people don't get to do the things that you've done. You acted with Steven Seagal and all these people, like the History Channel. I've seen you on Scorpion King, like all these movies, and it's been incredible to watch you throughout the years. And now I get to interview you. I feel like I made it, man. I feel like I'm in the ring with the belt.
Wow, I appreciate that, man. It's been a hell of a journey, that's for sure. So many things have unfolded that I could have never imagined. Being a professional fighter, a professional athlete, is an amazing thing in our society, and something I felt very blessed to be able to have done that for 14 years and take care of my family the way that the sport has.
So there's probably a guy out there watching this show right now that wants to be in the situation that you've been in your past, right? What's the advice that you have for the guy out there that wants to be a UFC fighter?
Find your passion, whatever that passion is. And if that's fighting, then get about finding that gym, finding that team, that group of guys that you're going to sweat and bleed with. They're going to push you to the absolute limit, but at the same time, take care of you and make sure that you're doing the right things and staying on track, taking care of your health. This is the only vehicle you're going to get to ride through this entire life and this entire journey with. And fighting, let's be honest, is a tough way to make a living. So you're going to push that as far, the limits to that body as far as you can push it with the right team and the right guys, and get the most out of that. Make the sacrifices wherever you need to make those sacrifices to be successful at that. But set those goals, draw that map, find that team. As much as this is an individual combative sport, you're only as good as the guys you're training with, rubbing elbows with on a regular basis. So you better find a good team of guys that are going to take care of you and help you achieve those goals. That's where it's at.
That's a great answer. So what's one thing about you that people would be surprised to know?
I have a degree in foreign language and literature from
Wow.
Oklahoma State University, where I wrestled for 4 years. It was at that time from 1988 to 1992 in college that I started writing. I started writing prose and poetry and stuff like that, doing some drawing, and I have an artistic side that not a lot of people know about. My daughter is very similar. My daughter is a very good drawer. She writes some poetry and stuff too. My son is the other side of my personality. He's the soft-spoken kind of intellectual. He's very good at math. He's that kind of science side of my personality, and my daughter is kind of the creative, wild side of my personality. It's really interesting to see those two kind of come at life from opposite ends of the perspective. But yeah, I think that's probably something that not a lot of people would know about me.
So what's your plans for the future?
I'm going to continue to act and enjoying that process. Getting in, we just produced the Demon Pit a couple years ago. Still finishing up getting that distributed. That's kind of the first time I put some of my own skin in the game to develop a script and a project. Got to work with Dean Cain and Gianni Capaldi, and man, just some great actors and actresses in making that movie. Having a blast doing that. It's certainly a lot easier physically on the body than getting punched in the face for a living. I enjoy the commentating. I'm really enjoying part of that group and watching this new company in the sport explode. Take care of the fighters very, very well, paying the fighters great, giving the fighters a voice in how they're regulated, how they're managed through the Athletes Advisory Board, and some of the things that the PFL is doing to change our sport and be successful in our sport. So those are the two things that are occupying my free time. I'm involved, obviously, with the Extreme Couture GI Foundation. It's a veterans organization I started about 16 or 17 years ago to take care of some of our wounded combat veterans. We also run the chapter of MVP, Emerging Vets and Players, out of the gym in Vegas. We're the Nevada chapter for MVP, and you can find that at vetsandplayers.org. For any of you vets out there that are looking to reconnect with the veteran community in your neighborhood or via Zoom, because we do hybrid meetings as well, look at vetsandplayers.org and join us there. If you're struggling as a vet, need some counseling services, have some financial woes, go to xcgif.org. We have a portal there. Give us the information we need, and our 501c3 will help take some of that pressure off of you, help you get a counselor, get through some of the demons, and really kind of help you get back on track and take some of that pressure off while you're in that transition state.
And I'll put a link for all your websites and everything like that in the description below. If people want to check them out, you just click on the link. It'll bring you right to the websites.
Cool, man.
So how do you feel about Dana White these days?
I mean, Dana's Dana. I did my best to try and get along with Dana the years I fought for the company. We had times where we got along great, and other times where we didn't get along at all. And I think I don't really have an issue with Dana. Obviously, I think Dana has an issue with me at this point, and that's really on him. I got no problem with him. He's running the biggest promotion in the sport that I'm passionate about. I have a lot of fighters that fight for him and fight under him. I have no ill feelings towards him at all. It is what it is. I've tried to do the best I could do for my career and keep control of my career. He was trying to run his company the best that he could. It's that simple.
Yeah, like if the tables were turned, what would you do, right?
No, I mean, hard to say, hard to speculate, but
all business, I guess.
I think we as fighters need to recognize that we're the commodity, and if we don't come together and create a fighters association and force all these promoters to give us some minimum standards for pay, help us get some retirement set up, help us get some health insurance.
Yeah, medical.
All the things that every other professional athlete in our sport enjoys, frankly, is something that we need to come together and work towards as fighters and make sure that we're getting a fair shake, create that transparency in our sport. The fighter, the the promoters should have to disclose how much money they're making off of each one of these fights. How are those guys on that card supposed to negotiate their fair value in the marketplace if nobody knows? And I know the numbers. I mean, it's 13 to 15% of that money, the revenue from any one of
So
those.
it's all over the place.
It's
People
going
don't
to
know.
the fighters. Show me another sport in our society where only 13 to 15% of that money goes to the athletes that were actually in those fights, in that competition. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. Again, one of the things I think the PFL is doing a much better job about is paying these fighters better. I mean, we just had 6 new millionaires walk out of that arena 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C. That's pretty remarkable. So, and they're getting paid along the way through the regular season as they go as well. So, obviously I'm happy to see that happen, to see an organization like that come on. And obviously we just picked up Bellator. So I think there's a lot of buzz between the champions, champions versus champions fight coming up this next year, and Bellator versus Professional Fighters League. That's going to be very, very interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of great matchups there. I'm excited about the next year coming.
If you guys want to check out his links, will be in the description of this video. Just click on them, bring you right to the sites. Well, awesome, I appreciate you, man. And I wish you nothing but success in the future. You've been a great inspiration for a lot of people out there. And thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate
and
you, bud.
If you guys like this video, hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell so you can get my videos every time they drop. And if you don't like these videos, start your own podcast. Peace. Thanks, man.
You bet, man.